Hey there, Larry. Larry Kotlikoff. How you doing?
Hey, Glenn, good to talk to you again.
Great to have you on the Glenn Show, Larry. This is Laurence Kotlikoff, professor of economics at Boston University, who's speaking with me, Glenn Loury of Brown University and bloggingheads.tv. And we're talking today, Larry, about a proposal that you have for reforming the tax code of the United States of America. You have a piece that will be coming out in the New York Times on Monday, January 6th. According to the current schedule, we're recording just a couple of days before then. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing with the Blogging Heads audience what it is that you propose to do with the U.S. tax code, how it is that you've come to that proposal, and why you think it'll be an improvement over the status quo.
Okay, well, the column I'm writing for the New York Times is discussing a study I did with some co-authors on a large-scale life cycle dynamic simulation model. This is a model which features a number of countries, including the U.S. and Europe and Japan and China and India, and it's trying to look over time at what would happen to the U.S. and the other countries, to wages, to interest rates, to investment, to saving, to output, if the U.S. were to either eliminate its corporate income tax and substitute personal income taxation, let's say a higher tax on wages, for example, or a tax on, you could even also tax consumption, or alternatively were to simply broaden the corporate income tax break and get rid of all the loopholes and lower the rate so that we have, in effect, a flat corporate tax. So it's simulating these two different things in a context of a pretty kind of bread and butter model that economists use, but it's sophisticated insofar as it's looking at all the major interactions between the countries and their trade, and also taking into account all the demographics that they're facing, the fact that China is catching up and India is catching up with the developed world in terms of their efficiency of their workers, and also taking into account all the fiscal policies the different countries are involved in. So you need these elements to do a serious job in trying to understand what tax reform here in the U.S. would mean through time. You can't ignore the rest of the world. You can't ignore the aging of our country and the much more rapid aging of China, the very much more significant aging of Japan and Europe. All these things play a role in figuring out where is that capital, the tools and the structures. Where's the capital that people have that they've saved? Where's that going to be allocated? It's going to be put in Italy, where there's not going to be that many people, or will be put in China, where there are a lot of people, or will China be saving so much as to not being able to use all that capital and ship some back to the U.S.?
Call
So,
from.
I have to call you back.
okay, sure.
I'm sorry for the interruption, Larry. That was a telephone call. Please, I really was very interested in what you were saying. First of all, you've got a large-scale life cycle dynamic model of the global economy. Secondly,
Right.
that model allows you to predict the consequences of various different reconfigurations of the U.S. tax system, including eliminating or radically simplifying the corporate income tax and introducing new taxes, perhaps on wages or consumption.
Right.
Thirdly, the causal mechanism that you're trying to capture with the model has to do with global capital flows, the behavior of investors who will respond in a global economic environment to any changes in the American tax code, and your model permits you to quantify, at least you think it does, what those effects might be. Do I summarize correctly?
Yeah, it's a stylized model, and that means among economists, as you know, that means that it's got a lot of strong assumptions. It doesn't have all the realities that we face and all the uncertainties we face, but it is a model that I developed initially with Alan Auerbach, who's a professor at UC Berkeley, back starting in 1979. So we've been working on this model through time to figure out what we can learn about fiscal policy And this particular model, which is called the Auerbach-Kotlikoff life cycle simulation model,
It would be.
is being, yeah, it's been used by scholars all around the world to do simulation studies, and it doesn't have any crazy supply side assumptions. It's not like if you cut taxes, personal taxes, everybody's going to go out and work like mad, like Art Laffer believes. Nor does it have any crazy demand side assumptions like Paul Krugman thinks hold, where the government can just increase spending, and all of a sudden the economy is going to respond so strongly as to have the extra taxes to pay for that spending, so that both of these people, Laffer and Krugman, are basically hawking voodoo economics. They're hawking magic, economic magic. This is a
I got
model
it. Hold on, Larry. Hold on.
Yeah.
So Art Laffer, I think I can say without risk of contradiction, is not a distinguished economist. He's a famous economist. He had some influence during the Reagan administration. He's the guy that drew on the napkin the curve relating the tax rate to the amount of revenues raised, and noticed that that curve had to be zero revenues if the tax rate were zero, or if it were 100%, and concluded from that it must therefore be at least theoretically possible that you could get more revenues by cutting tax rates. And that's become a conservative mantra. But that's Art Laffer. Paul Krugman, who has a Nobel Prize, everybody knows that. He writes columns for the New York Times now, and he's a pundit. But he is a distinguished economist. He was professor at MIT. He was professor at Princeton. He has redefined, or at least his work has helped to redefine modern international trade theory and how economists think about it. And for you to lump the two of them together and accuse them both of voodoo economics at least needs another sentence or two of justification from you, Professor Kotlikoff.
Well, I'm not talking about everything that Art Laffer has done in terms of his research, and I'm not talking about everything that Paul Krugman's done. Obviously, he is a Nobel Prize winner. He deserved getting that prize. He did some fundamental work in international trade theory that was widely acclaimed and is still used. So I'm just talking about their pronouncements about fiscal policy. And if you read Krugman on a daily basis, or how often he writes in the New York Times, you'll see him repeatedly saying, without any fundamental justification, that we can just spend more money and that's going to expand the economy and pay for itself. Implicitly, that's what he's saying, although he's never come quite out to say it. But what we've done is spend more money, the economy really hasn't responded, and we're facing larger obligations, or actually we're dumping larger obligations into our children's laps. So everything I see at a kind of a gross macroeconomic level comports better with this life cycle model that we're simulating, a model where there's no free lunch fundamentally. There's more efficient tax systems than others, and in that sense you can get some improvement without as big a cost in terms of revenue, but because the economy does respond in this model, this is a model with a dynamic model with behavior, responses of agents, firms, and individuals to incentives to work and save, and you can get improvements in the economy for sure.
Okay, so I was just about to ask you about supply side craziness and demand side craziness. You were describing your model, which worries about the reactions of rational economic agents, firms, consumers, investors, to changes in tax policy. And you were saying that you do not build in any assumptions that you will automatically get growth if you cut taxes, or you'll automatically get growth if you increase government spending, which are instances of craziness that you've identified on both the supply side and the demand side. The supply siders think that You're going to get a revenue response from cutting tax rates because they invoke incentives, but they don't ground it in any quantification of actual behavioral response. Arthur Laffer was your example of a supply sider. The demand
Yeah,
siders,
they overstate the behavioral response, exactly.
they
Yep.
overstate the behavioral response. The demand siders, on the other hand, are using a Keynesian logic, saying that in a period of recession such as we are now, increasing spending by the government or by consumers will lead to greater economic output because it will call forth unemployed resources, and you'll get an extra boost that way. And you say you believe that Paul Krugman overstates that effect. Have I summarized
Yeah,
correct?
that's grounded on a basis of a Keynesian economics, which isn't really what I think is going on in the actual economy. There's by Keynesian economics, I'm talking about the degree to which the wages and the prices in the economy are sticky or not flexible. And I don't see great evidence that we've had a great recession as a result of workers hiking up their wages overnight. Back when Lehman Brothers went under, I didn't see any workers, any unions raising their wages, or any employers, accepting much higher wage demands right after Lehman went under. Nor did we see anybody jacking up their prices at that point. So the fundamental theory underlying Krugman's notion that Keynesian theory requires assumptions about wages and prices that we don't actually see in reality, it seems to me. So he's been hawking this view of how to fix the economy without any evidence, without any public discussion of where he's coming from, what theory he's actually, is he using this kind of simplistic Keynesian 1945 model? That seems to be the case. And, I've looked at a lot of what he's written and written about what he's written, and it's very disappointing.
Well, he's not the only one. I mean, he's not the only person going around saying that the slump that we're in will be relieved if we can expand demand. People, and not only Paul Krugman, the President of the United States, as far as I can tell, and many, many members of Congress, certainly among the Democrats, think that this is what they're saying, for example, about extending unemployment insurance benefits for the long-term unemployed. They are arguing that that's good for the economy because they're saying that more money in the hands of consumers will lead to them spending it, and that the consumer spending will drive firms to create jobs and to make investments. Now, you're saying that that logic, if I understand you, which is not only Paul Krugman's logic, but it seems to me to be the logic of economic policy analysts left of center, is wrong. You're saying it's wrong.
Well, I'm not, if you give people money, they're going to go spend it. And the question is, who's going to pay for that? Are those bills going to be left for children, including a lot of poor children, to pay? Now, unemployment insurance benefits, I'm not saying we shouldn't keep them high. We've got a lot of people that are suffering in the economy. But I think the fundamental reason we've got a recession is not because demand's too low or taxes are too high. It's because we've psyched out the economy. We've got everybody thinking that these are roughly bad times, that we've got fundamental problems that aren't being addressed, and that the government is adrift to a large extent. And I think that's true. Now, what I'm proposing in this, as a result of this research that I'm talking about in the New York Times column, is eliminating the corporate income tax and potentially either raising personal taxes to pay for it or to impute. One way you can get rid of the corporate income tax is to integrate it with the personal income tax in a way that the shareholders have to pay taxes at the personal level on the corporate profits as they're accruing. And that's called corporate tax integration. So if we did that, let's talk about that option. What corporations would see would be no disincentive to operate in the U.S., where we have a pretty high marginal effective corporate income tax, which has been driving companies to produce outside of the U.S. And they would see a zero effective marginal corporate income tax, not just U.S. companies when they're thinking about whether to outsource or relocate their operations abroad, but also foreign corporations would operate in the U.S. without having to pay a corporate income tax. So we have, if you look at the data, here's an example of something that Krugman's not discussing. We have basically a post-war low in terms of our net domestic investment rate. And the domestic investment rate, net of depreciation, last year was 4%. It was 15% in 1950. So our domestic investment rate, and this is not an aberration, the domestic investment rate has gone downhill from 1950 through now, together with the national saving rate. It's been reduced national saving as a result, I think, of the fiscal policies that we've been running. And domestic investment has gone down too, because if Americans don't save, they have nothing to invest with. And what we need to do is have more investment, and we're not going to fix our problems overnight. Giving cash for clunkers is an overnight fix, and it wasn't particularly effective. It was just leaving bigger bills for our kids. So let's try and do something that economics, mainstream economics supports, and that's what this model is all about. It's a mainstream economics model, and it shows you very significant improvements in the economy and in real wages of workers. Let me just say this, Glenn, that most people
Larry, you're putting up, hold on. There's so much that's on the table. I just think we need to clarify a little bit exactly what you're talking about. So you want to eliminate the corporate income tax and replace it with a tax on individual shareholders who will be paying an imputed tax based upon their share of the profits that the corporation that they own part of will have earned. Right. So how does that, since the money is still being paid, at the end of the day, when the corporation pays the tax, the shareholders are the ones who are ultimately paying, since they own the corporation is a legal fiction. How is it that shifting the incidence or the location of collecting the tax from the corporation itself to the people who own shares in the corporation, how does that get corporations to want to invest their funds in the United States and not abroad?
Well, right now we have, under the U.S. corporate income tax, if you earn profits on your U.S. operations, according to some estimates, you pay 35% of that at the margin. That's the effective the effective marginal rate, but it's also turns out just more or less accidentally to be the nominal rate as well. Other economists think the marginal effective rate is closer to 23%. So there's some discussion about in the literature here about how high the marginal rate is. But anyway, so if you put your capital abroad, if you invest it abroad and you don't bring the profits back home to the U.S., you pay, until you do repatriate those profits, you pay a zero tax. So there's a big incentive under the current U.S. tax system to operate abroad. Now, some people want to, maintain the existing corporate tax system and just tell people that if you earn profits abroad and you bring those profits back to the U.S., they won't be subject to taxation. That's not really, I think, fair in terms of overall progressivity. What I'm discussing is that a corporation that's owned by, let's say, rich Americans, and that they own most of the corporate stock that's owned by Americans. Corporation earns profits, whether they earn those profits in the U.S. or abroad. They're going to show up under this proposal, which I call the common sense tax. They would show up on the as taxable income to the owners, the shareholders.
Okay. I see. So what it is that you're extending the effective tax on corporate profits to profits earned abroad by having those profits attributed to domestic shareholders who own a stake in the corporation, So the corporation can have the profit anywhere. It can be in Germany, it can be in Japan, it can be in China. They don't have to bring the
Mhm.
money back to the United States. The people who own shares in the corporation will be paying taxes to the U.S. government under your proposal, regardless of where the profits are realized by the corporation.
Right. But the corporations will no longer have an incentive to operate in Germany or somewhere else outside the U.S. in order to keep their taxes low. And by the way, this treatment of corporate profits and making the owners of the corporations pay each year on the profits that are made each year is exactly how we treat subchapter S corporations, and it's how we treat proprietorships and partnerships. If you have a small business, you're a proprietor, let's say you're a sole proprietor, you make some income this year, you have to pay taxes on it at the personal level. It's imputed right away to your personal income. You also have to pay FICA taxes, by the way, on that. So I'm just trying to keep the treatment of business profits the same no matter whether you're a corporation or a proprietorship or a non-corporation, non-corporate
Okay.
entity. Yeah.
Can I just say that this sounds like something that a Republican could get behind?
Well, it's something that Democrats should really get behind because,
But I mean, it sounds like things Republicans and not Democrats have been saying. Am I wrong?
well, it sounds like I'm a Republican, and I'm not a Republican. Just to be clear, I'm not a Democrat. I did vote for President Obama twice. I have great respect, deep respect for him. I
Okay.
think he's probably the top president that we've had since Kennedy.
I don't,
That's my view.
but we can talk
Well,
about
I know
that
we
on
differ on
another
that.
blogging heads.
And I'm not giving him an A plus for his performance, just to be clear, but I'm a tough grader as it goes. The uh, the thing about that Democrats need to understand, or anybody in the country needs to understand, is that when you tax uh, corporations under the corporate income tax, uh, the owners of those corporations can take their capital, they can move their corporations outside of the U.S. and they can escape the tax. Now, when a corporation moves its operations abroad, and about 1,000 top U.S. companies did that, in particular, they moved a lot of operations over to Ireland when Ireland took its corporate income tax rate from about 50% down to about 12%, 12.5%, and produced what's called the Irish Miracle. Uh, many top companies in the U.S. moved operations over there. And what happens then is that they leave U.S. workers behind. They leave the workers with fewer jobs and lower wages. You see this today in the discussion that's going on with Boeing and the Machinists Union
Yeah.
in Washington. The union there is fighting for Boeing to stay in Washington to produce the 777 new aircraft that Boeing is trying to manufacture. Boeing's saying, look, guys, look, union members, if you don't cut your demands, we're going to move to North Carolina to produce this plane, or South
Yeah.
Carolina to produce. So, uh, so if that happens, if they do move out of state, the workers in Washington state are going to get hurt. So who's actually going to, let me put it this way. Suppose that Washington state were to put a very high corporate tax in place to tax any corporation's profits by, let's say, 20%. Well, you'd have most U.S. companies who are now operating in Washington state move a lot of their operations outside of Washington state to avoid that tax. And that wouldn't therefore hurt the rich people that own those corporations. It would hurt the workers who stay behind in Washington state. And that's what Democrats who purport to care about workers, Republicans are supposed to care about the rich and Democrats are supposed to care about the poor. I think this is basically hogwash. I think both Democrats and Republicans have pretty much the same values when it comes to people and treating people reasonably and having progressivity. If we had a discussion about the fundamentals rather than all the the trappings and the words, and really got down to what people really care about, I don't think there's that much disagreement.
There's a couple of things I want to
Yeah.
ask you about, Larry. I hear you, and it's very interesting. So one of them is this race to the bottom kind of idea. We have various jurisdictions, each one of which independently sets its policy. In the example, you had states setting policy that were more or less favorable to companies and companies moving between the states. So the states are in competition with one another. And you had countries setting corporate tax policy and corporations
Exactly.
free to move between countries. So the countries are in competition. It seems to me, and your proposed solution on the latter is to reconfigure the tax system such that the corporations don't have any benefit from moving between countries because the taxes on their earnings are independent of where they're located. Now,
Yeah.
another way to go, it seems to me, would be for the jurisdictions to enter into some kind of compact or understanding, a treaty or a federal arrangement, so that their independent policy-making autonomy doesn't work against themselves. It works against themselves in the sense that the corporations can play one jurisdiction off against another. But if the
Right.
jurisdictions were to combine and to come to an understanding, a treaty, as it were, we won't compete with each other in this way, and enter into that understanding, that too would disarm the corporations from their ability to benefit by moving around. I
Yeah.
have to
We had
call
a
you
world.
back. I'm busy now.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
Oh yeah. If we yeah had a world government, a single government for the entire world, that would work. But we have a
Well,
lot of developed countries and developing countries that are competing with each other and saying, look, if I cut my corporate tax, I'll get extra investment coming to my country. So it is a beggar thy neighbor kind of
yeah, but
game here.
we have the World Treaty Trade Organization. We have non-proliferation treaty. We have other kinds
Right.
of
Right.
mutually beneficial understandings that countries can enter into, even though there is no global government. So anyway,
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
No, no, you're absolutely right. If you can get all these countries, China, India, Europe, Japan, all to set the corporate income tax rate at the same level, all of Eastern Europe, Russia, yeah, you could make some. It would. This proposal wouldn't have as much uh, impact. We wouldn't. I probably wouldn't be proposing this particular reform. But given where the world is in terms of what arrangements are around in the world, uh, having us eliminate our corporate income tax, integrate it with the personal income tax, give U.S. companies no incentive to operate abroad, uh, get our domestic investment rate back up. This produces very major, in this model, and again, it's a stylized model, it produces very major increases in wages, about 8%, pretty rapidly in the U.S. And it would, we have workers who haven't seen real wage increases for decades. So let's figure out things that are actually going to make some sense and uh,
Okay,
turn things around.
I just
That
want to
isn't
be
just involving giving away money.
I want to be clear on the quantitative magnitude of the effects that you've estimated. You're saying that your proposal to, in effect, eliminate corporate income tax as it's now configured and instead tax individual shareholders for the earnings that the companies they own a part of have realized, wherever they're realized, will
Yeah.
lead to an 8% increase in real wages of the typical American worker. Is that what you said? Within what period of time?
Yeah, let me just want to pull up the paper real quick just so I make sure I'm giving you the exact right numbers. Uh, yeah, it happens relatively rapidly. Within a few years, really, you can get a very significant increase in corporate in investment in the U.S.
And that's
and
revenue neutral. You're
company.
calibrating the revised system in order to maintain the same amount of revenue collected through the corporate income tax as is today.
Yeah. Uh, Another way to think about this, Glenn, is we have a huge distortion here. I mean, the corporate tax in the U.S. In some of our simulations, we're assuming it's 35%, and then in other countries it's around 20% on average. And then if we eliminate it, it goes from 35 down to zero. So you're getting rid of a very big incentive to be out of the country, and that's why you get a pretty substantial response in terms of the economy. So and I'm just trying to pull up exactly the right numbers to tell you. So this is not based on any, craziness. This is just economics doing its thing. Uh,
Okay.
let me put it this way: if we set the U.S. corporate tax rate a lot higher, we would have even less investment here. We'd have less revenue. The other important thing for people to understand, I actually,
That's a supply
it's
side
about,
kind of point,
well, this is a model that has supply and demand. It's what we call a general equilibrium model. It's not, but the notion of when I think about supply side economics, I think about people that basically aren't economists who are politically oriented,
Yeah.
who think that you can cut taxes, who have no kind of quantitative feeling for the economy where we are. Yes, Art Laffer would be right if we had 100% marginal tax rates or anything close to that, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
Not that we might not
But
get
but
there.
what you just said is that if we raise the corporate income tax rate, we probably end up with less revenue because of this behavioral response of companies moving their operations offshore in order to avoid the tax. And as I say,
Yeah.
that has the feeling to me of a very,
Okay,
sort
but
of
let me just say, in the simulations,
supply
Glenn,
side.
the cutting the corporate income tax to zero is not. You need to raise some other tax in order to make up for the loss in revenue to make things revenue neutral.
Right.
And in that sense, it's not a Laffer curve model. It's not a model that has that's a Laffer curve. But there is a welfare gain to actually to all Americans, even the current elderly, from this. And some of this gain is from beggar thy neighbor. We're taking capital from workers in other countries and bringing it into the U.S. So from a strictly American perspective, this is a very substantial improvement in well-being for U.S. workers, not just current workers, but those alive in the long run.
I want to ask you one more thing. I'm running out of time here, and that also has the ring of a right of center economic narrative, and that's about burdening future generations. You were making some remarks earlier. You have a dynamic life cycle model, so you're looking over the decades, and you're taking on board the fact that current government expenditures will incur obligations that will affect as yet unborn generations, and you're taking that into account. Can you say a little bit more about that? Because you seem to be concerned that the Keynesians, you use Paul Krugman as an icon for that, don't take seriously enough the implications for future generations of the policy initiatives that they are advocating.
Yeah, well, we have most of our debts are off the books. They're hidden in the form of Social Security liabilities, Medicare, Medicaid, now Obamacare liabilities, defense spending, all kinds of obligations that we have, and we have taxes that are projected that are far too low to cover those obligations. So we have a huge fiscal gap, and I've discussed this before.
Yeah.
So that you see this in the simulation model. You see, even though the U.S. is still going to be the young kid on the block in terms of developed countries, it's not aging that significantly. For example, we have about 13% of the population right now that's over 65, maybe 14%. We're going to end up around 20%. It's not that big a deal. In Japan, it's going to go up to 37%. So, but the simulations show that because of healthcare spending per beneficiary growing out of control and projected to continue that way, and other obligations and having taxes that are low relative to the spending, that we end up with sky-high tax rates in the simulation. This is just the baseline simulation without any reform of anything. So the models, these models, which don't entail any free lunches, show that our kids are going to be in much worse shape. They're already facing terrible, economic problems as it is, competition with these smart machines and so forth that are, Google and Amazon are racing with each other to put people out of work. That's their main goal in life, it appears. So.
Oh, come on, Larry. Yeah. You and I both know that that's the wellspring of progress.
Well,
companies racing to put people out of work is the way in which you get growth, isn't it?
The
Come on.
technological change we're experiencing now, Glenn, is I think, a lot different because these smart machines can do, in large part, exactly what a person can do, which wasn't the case in the past. If you went
But
from the horse and buggy,
we would be
there was a
better off to impede the introduction of labor-saving technology. I mean, did I hear you say that?
I think we have to realize that there is a process. There are models, and I've been working with Jeff Sachs on these models whereby smart machines actually reduce wages so substantially that over time the entire society is worse off because you have workers not being able to save because they haven't earned enough money, and then you have less capital, and you have this form of technological change can be immiserating, making everybody poor in the long run.
I don't believe it, Larry. I gotta see
Well,
that. I gotta see that. And
we,
even if it works within the model, I'm going to be a difficult sell to get me to believe that it would apply to the real economy. Overall,
well,
worse off to have greater productive capacity and more efficient use of resources.
Well, we have a model. We have a paper. It's a stylized model and it's a toy model. It's an NBR working paper, and National Bureau of Economic Research working paper. It's right
Yeah,
on my website.
I'm going to look it up.
So, yeah, sure. It's I think it's a serious problem. I think if you look at a horse and buggy being replaced by the taxi cab, they both had a driver. Now we're going to have a driverless car where the taxis don't have any people inside them. You go to the CVS, you've got the machines being helped by the people rather than the people being helped by the machines. It's really you've got these poor young kids.
Yeah, but Larry, this is the
And,
oldest story in the world. This has been going on for
yeah,
hundreds of years. I
I
understand that
know.
there's change
I know that
and that
the law that
people are
yeah.
inconvenienced by the change, but how are we as in the aggregate made worse off by expanding our technical knowledge and our mastery over nature and
Well,
the
yeah.
ability to
In this
use.
particular, yeah, I understand. But Glenn, there is a dynamic here, and the people that invent the machines tend to get most of the profits are the elderly. They get to consume the returns from these machines. The young people are put out of jobs or get lower wages. They can't save as much. Then over time, they're bringing less capital, since saving is what we use to invest. They bring less capital into their old age. Then the next set of young workers have less capital to work with. They have better machines, but less capital. So you can have a dynamic here where everybody actually ends up worse off, where the Luddites actually get it right because of the nature of this technology. If you have machines that really directly substitute for workers, think about, 15 more Chinas being showing up here, and what would mean for American workers. Well, what if we have 15 billion robots introduced over time, or today? Suppose they were introduced today, they could do everything that you and I do, even teach courses. And we university professors are being outplaced outsourced by technology too. We'll have these, we'll have the
That
top
frees
economists
us
in the
up to find something else to do. That's what I teach my students in Econ 101.
that
You
well,
know,
it's but Glenn,
I grant you that I'll be out of a job if you get a robot to do it, but the economy will have more effective resources to produce goods and services because you won't need my labor to do that, and my labor is freed up to do something else useful. I, I don't.
but that's all predicated on a certain kind of technological innovation and in the form of the production function, and we can easily write down technologies where the robots, the machines are direct substitutes, perfect substitutes or close to perfect substitutes for the workers, and you get different outcomes.
Okay,
So
interesting.
that's where I'm coming from. Yeah,
Listen, I'll give you a minute to summarize if you'd like to take it, what you think it's important for people to take away from this conversation, because I have to terminate our conversation now.
sure. Well, I think that historically people thought that the corporate income tax is really taxing wealthy people and reducing the taxes of workers. But that might have been true when the U.S. was kind of the biggest economy in the world in the post-war period, where it had almost all the capital stock, and there wasn't too many places for the capital to go. But now the capital can leave home. They can leave the country and go to foreign countries where their tax rates are lower. And when that capital leaves, it leaves the workers behind. So people that care about workers and the wages of workers have to worry about the corporate income tax and its incentives to have people produce abroad. I want to, as a proposal, suggest that we eliminate the corporate income tax and force corporate shareholders to pay taxes on corporate profits at the personal level, no matter where those profits are earned. The U.S., could be Bermuda, wherever. And that will lead to more capital coming back into the U.S. There'll be no incentive to produce abroad relative to the U.S. And I think that will significantly raise wages. That's what the study that's on my website at kotlikoff.net shows, that I co-authored, shows. It's a serious study. It's not just back of the seat hypothesizing. It's based on a model that is used, we've developed over 3 decades and is used in many parts of the world by a lot of economists. A serious, no magic model showing that getting rid of the corporate income tax can make a big difference to the U.S.
Okay. I think you meant to say we'll increase the incentive to invest in the U.S. relative to abroad. And precisely. So
increase the incentive to invest in the U.S.
Right. So very good. And your proposal is going to be described in a piece in the New York Times scheduled to run on Monday, January 6th. Very good, Larry. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. Take care now.
Hey, my pleasure, Don. As always. Take care. Bye-bye.